In the US, it's all one nation under God, whereas here in Europe, we are very shy about doing God.
If I were to come up with a sort of synopsis of why there's been a departure from God in Europe, I put it down to left-wing politics.
God and politics, the two subjects that you cannot bring up at the dinner table, but we're going to do them right here. This is Interference. Welcome back. I'm here with Alex online, and we're going to do it, God and politics. And let's start off, Alex, with the difference between the US and Europe. Let's face it, in the US, it's all one nation under God and all that kind of stuff, whereas here in Europe, we are very shy about doing God, aren't we? Politicians, they feel a bit queasy about mentioning God. Why is that?
Well, I think it's a number of things that have gone on here. So in America was founded, it's a very new country when you think about it. It's a bit of a baby. And so when they were drawing up their Bill of Rights and so on and so forth, there are mentions of God, not in the Constitution, but there are in other documents. So the founding fathers were men of God very much. And America, of course, it's such a huge nation that it accommodates all. So it accommodates a lot of Christians in the Bible Belt. A lot of people who went over to the New World to settle it might have come from countries, former slaves and so on and so forth, who have a very strong faith. Whereas in Europe, we've had God around for the best part of 2 millennia, and we've had a lot of issues with God during that period of time. The Catholics versus the Protestants and the Lutherans. But I think the main reason is that in America, the political debate is full of heart and spirit. It's almost like Hollywood does politics. It likes big narratives and high drama and strong characters. In Europe, and especially left-wing Europe, we all know that Marxists despise God. They want to destroy religion. And so what we have really in, especially the supranational entity of the European Union, is an entity that would rather God didn't exist. It would rather Christianity wasn't spoken about at all. But you do have pockets of politicians, again on the right wing in particular in Europe, who want to bring the narrative back to God. I'm thinking of Giorgia Meloni, in fact, because during her campaign to be elected, she spoke passionately about being a mother, about being a Christian. So it's a very mixed bag. But I think if I were to come up with a sort of synopsis of why there's been a departure from God in Europe, I put it down to left-wing politics.
Or maybe even the French Revolution. Can we go back that far? Obviously, we have this secular tradition over here, don't we? You can practice the religion you want as long as you don't connect the two. I mean, you mentioned also Italy. It's true that Europe is not one bag, is it? There are pockets of religion still, but not many. There's Italy. I'm thinking also of Poland. The new president of Poland did mention his Christianity in his inauguration speech. But generally speaking here, we have this established tradition that we don't mix politics and religion, right? Even Alistair Campbell, hold on. Was it not Alistair Campbell, the famous aide of Tony Blair, who said, "We don't do religion"?
Well, because he is a left-winger, and a lot of people on the right wing, and it's a growing trend. I mean, I'm a churchgoer, and my former church in London, I don't live in London anymore, there's just no space for people anymore. They use every annex. They put people in the cafe. They put people in the basement. There are people queuing up like they're trying to go to Fabric nightclub in the 90s. And I think this is a scene that's actually being replicated across lots of churches, especially modern churches in the United Kingdom. And there are countries where they still bind their morality to the sort of codifications of the cultural mores of Christianity, places like Hungary under Viktor Orban, for instance, who's very pro-natalist. But in the United Kingdom, for example, we've got a bit of an issue because we're not a secular country. Thanks to Henry VIII, the church is very much political because, of course, he left the Vatican during the Great Schism, decided he was going to be the head of the church. And that tradition still exists. King Charles III is the head of the Church of England. But it means actually in the United Kingdom that politicians do get to mess with politics, and they did. David Cameron, of course, was the one who decided that the Church of England had to legalise gay marriage. So it was essentially telling a religion, you've got to allow a man to marry a man in your church buildings, even though the Bible expressly says that marriage is between a man and a woman. But that act, the Gay Marriage Act from David Cameron, came from originally a big drive by the European Union. So I take it back to my initial point, which is cultural Marxists, people on the left wing of politics, absolutely despise religion. They want to eradicate religion. And what has happened in Europe over the course of the last 50 years is we've seen deepening supranationalization, bureaucratization. Arguably, I would say it's become a lot more left-wing and a lot more Marxist. It's not just the abandonment of religion, but the deconstruction of so much of our heritage, so much of what makes us nation states, so much of all that sort of beautiful heterogeny that makes Europe Europe. Instead, we've been told we're all one people. There's been a push for multiculturalism, but in terms of actually letting in Islam or all the other world religions and say, this is what makes up France, this is what makes up Italy, rather than actually Italy's a Catholic country with Catholic beliefs, or France is a Catholic country of Catholic beliefs. And I think what is happening now is a big pushback. And there's going to be a resurgence. And I think that, what politicians have gotten away with for the past 50 years, I'm not sure they're going to be able to going forward.
What you say about the eradication of religion, that makes me think of the Finnish member of parliament who is actually being prosecuted for mentioning her religion online. It was actually on X/Twitter. And not only is she being prosecuted, but she was cleared at 2 lower court levels, and now she's being taken to the Supreme Court. That's coming up in October. We interviewed her as part of a documentary we did on free speech.
I have to say that I felt it really surreal when sitting in a police station and questioned about my faith and my beliefs, and about very theological issues, by a policeman sitting there. I had the Bible on the table.
And she actually claims, the theory is that the anti-religion elements within Finnish society they're part of the woke movement, and they attacked Christianity, religion, as part of this wokeism. I guess that was, but you're saying, are you connecting the revival in religion with the right wing? Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, because actually you are absolutely right about, because I'm certain that the Finnish politician you're speaking about is a Christian, because they would never do it to a Muslim. They would never do it to a Sikh. They'd never do it to a Hindu. They'd never say, right, you should stop wearing a hijab in Parliament, or you should keep it quiet that you're a Muslim. If Charlie Kirk had been a young, fashionable imam, jeans, t-shirt, sitting on a stage with a microphone, saying to people, I'm a Muslim. In Islam, we believe that only a man can marry a woman. Oh, I'm a Muslim. In Islam, we believe in the sanctity of the unborn child. Then pap, he had been shot. There would be mass protests. There'd be the wearing of black armbands. There'd be taking the knee. There'd be prescribing everybody as terrorist organisations. There would be an outcry of mourning. His funeral would have been live televised on every single European channel. There'd be debates in the European Parliament. Because it was the killing of a Christian, for having Christian views in a Christian country. And that's what we need to remember. Don't listen to the BBC and all the other leftist news organisations when they say he was far right or he was a right-wing activist. He wasn't evangelising Christian. He just wanted to talk about Christianity and say, frankly, as Jesus did, I will go to where the people are. Feel free to challenge me. And he was a compassionate, kind man. And that element, that truism, it's not an argument, that truth seems to have been lost, and it's always the left wing, because what woke does is it wants to replace everything that's gone before with its neo-religions, its idea that a woman can have a penis, its idea that black people have been historically wronged and white people have privilege and there needs to be some sort of overcorrection. Again, the dismantling of the old structures. They hate the patriarchy. They hate the idea that, you need a nuclear family for stability. Things that have actually served Europe very well for the past 2 millennia. And something I often point out to people, there's a brilliant book called Dominion, and it talks about the history of Christianity and how it has brought the world so much. If you look at almost every invention for the last 1,000 years, if you look at the great explorers of the world who discovered new territories, discovered the new world, when you look at whether it's Sir Isaac Newton, who was a devout Christian, everything has come out of Christendom. Electricity, computers.
Right, but at the same time, Ali, there have been lots of wars of religion. I mean, look at what's going on in the Middle East, for example, and also, as you mentioned, the Protestants against the Catholics in Europe. There have been huge pogroms in the name of religion. Surely it's not all good, is it?
Well, there's huge wars in the name of everything. When we had the Civil War in the UK, it was between the Roundheads and the Capulets about, Cavaliers, turning Shakespearean there, about how the nature of democracy should look. When you have people with competing ideologies that are sort of believed very intensely, it can lead to conflict, which is a devastation, because I think religion at its core, and I speak on behalf of Christianity and no other, is a religion of love and a religion of peace. There was no idea that Jesus was saying, you've got to go and fight you because this is the way we've got to do things correctly. I don't remember Jesus going and doing the equivalent of giving a debate at the Oxford Union, or, he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's when it came to politics. But human beings have a way of messing things up, don't they? Human beings have a way.
They certainly do, and maybe taking over politics. I mean, taking over politics or using it as a power structure for their own means. I mean, I'm sure that the Muslims would also say that their religion is a religion of peace, but at the same time, we have obviously the Shias and the Sunnis at each other's throats in several countries. I mean, is there not an argument for saying that basically humankind uses, as you've just said, any excuse to jump on their war horse, and religion is one of those excuses? So I don't know. The idea that religion is always a force for good, I'm not sure about that one.
Well, no, I agree with what you're saying. There is a difference between Islam and Christianity. Christianity is fundamentally a religion of peace. Jesus' message is always about love. Always, 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 without exception, it is about love. And when people talk about the Old Testament, one has to understand in Christianity, Jesus is the revisionist of the Old Testament. The Old Testament foretells the New Testament, where Jesus comes and says, this is how you've got to live, basically, and would be appalled at the idea of Catholics fighting Protestants. The difficulty with Islam is it is a campaigning religion. It tells its followers, its adherents, that they must make everybody else Islamic, and that people who aren't Islamic are the enemy. And that is fundamentally at its core. Now, whether or not people want to go and act upon that depends upon how people want to interpret the Quran. But it is a campaigning religion at its core, which is why I think a lot of the world, when we have issues with world religions, it tends to be issues with Islam. You don't tend to get the same out of Sikhs, Buddhists, Hindus, Jews, because they aren't campaigning religions.
Fair point. But you could also say that Christianity was a campaigning. I mean, there were the Crusades, weren't there?
Which fought Islam, ironically, yeah. So no, but this is it. Religion, like anything else, like alcohol, okay? I like a good glass of wine. I'm sure you do as well. In fact, it's a product that has traditionally been made by monks. But if you wake up in the morning and you're necking...
In Belgium, especially.
Yeah. If you're waking up in the morning and necking a bottle of Cabernet, you're probably living your life wrong. Whereas if you're having a glass of wine with your dinner, even two, and getting a bit happy with friends, then it's a wonderful thing. So anything that is created in the world can be turned and used for bad, and bad people will do that. And religion, very often, because it is so personal to people, it finds itself very often at the heart of debates, as do politics. There are so many wars fought over who should be the next president, which tribe he should be from, which political party he represents. So anything that fundamentally comes down to humans grappling for sovereignty over belief, it's the stuff that makes people pick up arms. Now, thankfully, in the United Kingdom. That hasn't happened for a terribly long time. But we have seen wars in Europe, as we know, 2 world wars. Neither of those were based on religion as such. Well, I could argue, of course, that Hitler tried to exterminate people from one particular religion. But it's what we have seen actually in the de-religiousization of Europe, so to speak, and I don't know if I've just created a neologism there, is a vacuum where religion has not just been quietened down, volume down, let's put this to one side and let it be practiced privately. I think there's been an active persecution of Christianity. There's been an overstretch to try and sort of eradicate the ideas of Christianity and say they're outmoded and old-fashioned and therefore that they're homophobic or that they are too patriarchal. And where we have seen that vacuum be created, what has filled that vacuum tends to be so intense, so different, and then it's basically activism forced from a minority onto the majority, whereas often activism comes from the people upwards. There aren't a lot of trans people out there who for decades been saying, well, we want to get into women's spaces. There were, very tiny number of men, largely, who had gender dysphoria, who lived their life as women and quietly got about things. But what has happened in the vacuum where we have removed not just religion, but the sort of culture that's been built upon religion for the last 2 millennia, is these neo-religions have taken hold, whether it's
the vacuum. Yeah, now that
Greta Thunberg's,
the vacuum, that, you know what, I'm going to drop a name. Eric Fromm, he wrote a great book. I think he's actually labeled a Marxist, one of these Marxist socialists, sociologists. Anyway, he wrote a book called Escape from Freedom, in which he argued that the death of God, let's say, in Europe was filled by totalitarianism, in the sense that we as human beings, we need some kind of higher meaning. And when Christianity fell out of favor in the 20th century, these totalitarian regimes filled the void. That seemed like a very convincing argument when I read it. Now, but what you're saying now is that this revival, resurgence, is connected with, let's get back to politics. We're going into hardcore religion and the state of the human mind at the moment, but how does this connect to politics, in the sense that even in countries like France, where traditionally Catholic countries, you don't hear a lot about religion in the discourse. In fact, in my preparation for this chat, I've been reading about the right wing, the Le Pen movement. They don't talk about religion, for example. I mean, so it seems as if that still, even today, the right is very wary about taking on that mantle.
Yeah, and it's the same in the United Kingdom as well. I mean, France, as you know, talking about the French Revolution, deliberately made itself a secular society and divorced its politics from God. And I think that is something that the French are very keen on maintaining, although I think France is probably a far more religious country these days than the United Kingdom. But I think most things happen as a reaction to something. And what we have had in Europe for the past 50 years is this march towards Marxism, frankly, because the European Union, in what it represents, is a homogenizing Marxist factor. It's about sort of creating everything is equal, redistribute the wealth. Everyone has to have the same sort of social belief systems. But we have also seen mass immigration happening, particularly in the past 10 years, which again is a very sort of Marxist aim to create a global world with open borders. But what's happened then is, while our own culture has been sort of pushed to one side, ignored, dissolved, there has been this celebration of the alien cultures that have come into Europe, and especially in the United Kingdom, we're sort of constantly told, oh, it's Eid, you must go celebrate it, especially Islam. You must go celebrate this. There are sort of Ramadan lights on Regent Street when it's also Easter at the same time. And I think people sort of think, well, hang on, my grandparents taught me something, or my parents taught me of something. When I was at school, we sang Christian hymns. And you suddenly start thinking, this is my country, this is my culture, and I'm not allowed to have it anymore. And there's a quiet revolution now taking place where people are fed up with the way things have been done down for the past 20 years. They feel like second-class citizens in their own country. They feel like everything that was the fabric of their society and gave them moral meaning and was the nice stuff, the stuff that glued us together, has been stripped away and eroded, and people feel very lost. They feel very confused. And I think, social media and the tribalization the algorithm creates, that's had a huge impact. And people are just feeling very, very lost. They want something to cling on to. They feel like they're standing in a weir in the middle of the river with the rapids battering at their ankles, and they're going to lose hold at any moment. And they're looking for something to cling to. And I think people, therefore, are sort of going, actually, maybe the stuff I was brought up with is good. Maybe there is reason and meaning here. Maybe we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. But without statistically, you look at the growth of the modern church in the United Kingdom, and it's enormous. It is, and rapid.
Morning has broken. Did you used to sing that one?
Yeah, and I know it. It wasn't sort of on the
Morning has broken. I'm not going to sing. But I remember towards the end, there was Eden saw play, like Eden saw play. And I was a boy. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And they said, like, Eden saw play. I was like, what does that mean? Eden saw play. I thought it was some kind of one word, compound word. But you're right, there is definitely a revival. Well, I mean, we saw it, didn't we, at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, where there were lots of references to religion, but also there were people at the memorial. There was one great photo of one man carrying a huge wooden cross. I don't know in the US if this is a revival or if it's always been there.
Yeah, I think in the US, religion has always been there. But even they've gone through their period of being a bit sort of shy about it or thinking it's a bit passé. And again, it's when the left are in power that you see the drive to destroying religion take place. Now you've got Republicans in power. It's getting front row seat again. And for Christians, actually, the assassination of Charlie Kirk feels allegorical. It feels allegorical. It feels like this is a young man who is a family man, a devoted father, a very staunch Christian, who was just spreading the word of the Bible, who then got killed. And we as Christians, that is very allegorical. We're told in the Bible repeatedly, if you're a Christian, you may well face persecution. And it is written throughout the pages of the Bible continuously. And so the reaction, I think, of Christians to the killing of Charlie Kirk has been poignant. It's been, I think most Christians just hope, actually, that his death will bring more people to Christianity, that actually it will be an inspiring factor and make people who are looking at this, who aren't being drowned out by the minority of voices who are shouting that he's an extremist and far right and he had it coming, because those are utterly despicable, evil views. Because like I said, if this was a young guru or a young imam who got murdered, we would all be rightfully disgusted and appalled. So I don't think it's fair that there is this idea that because he was a Christian, therefore it's it's a punch bag. You can attack him for having his religious views, because that's the way it seems to have gone in modern life. You can attack a Christian, but you can't do that to any other religion. They're sort of ring-fenced and protected. And so I do hope that when ordinary people who heard, oh, this guy's far right, I want to go and see the sort of things he was saying then, and watched his videos and said, what? He wasn't. He had, strong views, but that's not being far right. That's being Christian. That's just being a devout Christian. And I hope that when they've been exposed to some of his arguments, because he was so good at winning them, that there will be people out there who are inspired now to think, what is this stuff called Christianity that underpins my
right? I'm wondering if it
democracy culture.
Will the left become religious again? I've been reading about there's a new media project in France, for example, called Le Cri Media, a new Catholic media project from the left, trying to reclaim Christianity from what they call the far right. A new generation of left-wing Christians. How about that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people would say Jesus, how would Jesus have voted if he was a voter? I mean, he wouldn't, because like I said, he kept politics far out of what he did. But some might argue that very much his teachings of breaking bread and sharing it among the many are quite socialist. That they are, economically socialist, let's say, but there's the small c conservative when it comes to how to behave. But so there is a lot to be said for how the left should embrace something like Christianity, the charity, the giving, the sharing, the distribution of wealth, the trying to elevate those who are poor, the sort of trying to reject materialism, which is what most world religions also say. But this is where we've had the creeping Marxism come into left-wing politics, which actually wants to break down and eradicate the structures that they think have dominated society for too long. And of course, the main glue, the main fabric and framework that has shaped Europe for 2 millennia has been Christianity. So it'd be nice to actually see a resurgence of the moderate left, actually, that has at its heart socially conservative values, but then at its core left-wing socialist values, perhaps, because it's certainly in Britain, I think if anyone put those two things together, that's probably the recipe for political success. I'm a staunch righty, but even I can easily look at and argue about the fact that when capitalism is unrestrained, it is quite wicked because it regards human beings as units, not as individuals. It doesn't look at the human, it looks at the bottom line. So there's plenty of arguments of how actually, yes, politics and religion should be separated, but if you follow a religion, you can take its values and bring them into your political life.
And you can be religious or not on the left or the right. I guess in an ideal world, the two should be separate, right?
Yeah, I mean, it should be, my argument is what Jesus' argument would be: render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Let the governments and the state do the tax collecting and the organisation of society. Let us as people who are connected to religion deal with matters of the heart. And if the matters of the heart are in the right place, then hopefully that would be a perfect spiritual guide that the matters of the head are then governed by. And actually, that is a lovely thing about when you have a state religion, there is something higher than your prime minister or your president. There is a higher moral authority, which I think adds as a very good check and balance in most societies of the world. So I think there is a sort of, all cultures come and go. There are revolutions, the acts and the beliefs of the forebears that get, rejected by the next generation. And I think we're on that cusp of change. There's something happening in the zeitgeist, and I think we're on the cusp of great change.
Let's do quickly under the radar. How about this Jimmy Kimmel business then? Did you see that? He was sacked and then reinstated. Well, what's your reading?
People go, but it's not free speech if he can't share what he wants and then
free speech.
It's like, hold on, he just told lies. He said that it was a MAGA person, a right winger, who killed Charlie Kirk. It wasn't. It was someone who was very keen on Antifa. So that was just a falsehood, which if you're going on to be one of the highest paid television hosts and say that, and you've said something that's factually wrong and therefore deeply offensive because it's factually wrong, if I did that on air, I would probably be called in and be spoken to because I'd be disgracing my profession. So it's not a matter of free speech. You can't just go around and say free speech is an absolutism. Therefore, a doctor can go up to a dying patient and go, boo, you're going to hell. Oh, sorry, that's free speech. No, I mean, of course there are limits.
I'll tell you, though, if lying was a reason to get sacked, well, most politicians would be out of a job, wouldn't they?
Well, politicians have gone out of jobs for lying, actually. We can see what happened to people like Boris Johnson. But, look, politicians are very good at spinning and deflecting and covering their own backs. But, humans are original sinners. We get a lot wrong. But in terms of Jimmy Kimmel, I don't watch him. I don't think I ever am going to watch him. Perhaps it's market forces, that there's an audience out there for him. Perhaps actually, normally when these things happen and they decide, actually, we shouldn't employ you anymore, you've disgraced us, there's usually something in the contract that if they try and get rid of the person, the payout is a lot more than just keeping them and paying them. So who knows what's gone on behind the scenes here. But at the end of the day, it's entirely up to the people who pay his wages if they think he suits their brand and is fit for purpose anymore. It's not a matter of free speech. The argument of free speech comes down to whether or not one should face persecution for having a particular viewpoint. If you're just saying something that's false as a TV presenter, or doing something that brings your company into, it creates some shame and embarrassment, then that's an employment decision. To me, that's
okay. Hero and zero. Here, let's do it. Hero and zero. Are we going to have Karl Marx as the zero?
He's always at zero for me, goodness gracious. And all of his acolytes and all of these sort of neo-Marxists who they're always our zeros, actually. The sort of common thread of our zeros on this podcast are those who seem to have come out of the sort of Marxist school of political belief. So perhaps we just go for the fountainhead this time. Why not?
And here, I've been writing a bit about Giorgia Meloni. She seems to have become the voice of, I hesitate before I say reason, but I mean, she's definitely respected across the spectrum in Europe now, and she is an unabashed right-winger, and as you say, Christian as well. How about Giorgia Meloni as this week's hero?
I love her. That woman can do no wrong in my eyes. I just wish she was allowed to do more, because I have a feeling she would do more if Italy wasn't sort of stuck in the vice of the ECB and the EU after the Eurozone crisis. I think that Ursula von der Leyen knows how to pick up the phone to Georgia and say, if you do that, we're going to call back all of those loans. But she is a hero to me. She always has been. And I remember how she was vilified for being a fascist, and she liked Mussolini, the most dangerous woman in Europe. Pictures on the front page of newspapers, because that's what they do on the other side. They demonize, they berate. But hopefully Giorgia Meloni represents the fact that the good people can win.
In fact, some people say she's part of the establishment now. She's coming across as very pro-EU. But anyway, listen, maybe that's a subject for our next chat. Thanks, Alex. That's all we got time for. Thanks for watching. Should God and politics be mixed or not? What do you think? Join us in the comments. See you next time. Bye-bye. 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 Bye-bye.